Alex Vitale, Project Manager of FoodChain, blockchain food provenance supply chain product out of Italy. Have we got the other slides, Danny? Yeah. There we go. Look at this, it's working beautifully. There, let's see. Yeah, I'm still in holiday mode, right? So basically from farm all the way through provenance to fork, all right? So we'll get into a little bit about this and some other use cases as well, which I think is really interesting. We were having a bit of a chat before around, you know, it's not just about picking a banana up at Woolies and going, oh, where did it come from? There's some really interesting use cases that they're looking at the moment as well. So that's good from there. Transparency of food, being able to search things. All right, we'll come back to some of these. And then obviously, you know, the screens and the app as we go through things, but we'll talk about this a little bit more. And I'm going to put that on B. I was going, oh, you put it in the PDF, haven't you? Rather than PowerPoint. All right, so I'm going to have the shining light. We good? We good? We're all good? Alex, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Startup Grind, January 2020. Can you tell us a little bit around kind of, you know, really the personal side of things, how you ended up in Perth, and then your association with the company and how it was founded and those kind of things?
Okay, so everything started in 2011. So I was born in Italy, grew up in Italy, spent 20 years of my life over there. Studied in Italy and then finished my study, and I decided that I wanted to go to Australia. So why Perth? Because I have part of my family over here. So I ended up in Perth for, let's say, short term as an experience. I wasn't planning my career ahead, and eventually I liked it. I liked what I was seeing around. I liked the vibe and the weather and everything else here. So I love the city, absolutely. And I decided to study, so I did some studies in mechanical engineering here, and at the same time I found a good job. I started working, fun enough, that's civil engineering, and throughout the years I was always supporting the project that had been initiated by my brother, the other two co-founders of the FoodChain, what is today FoodChain. So I've always been following it from here. Up to the point where my current job will not will take me too much to take up too much time, and then I switched over and I dedicated my time for the project that was initiated in Italy. It was up and running in Italy. So that's already 2016, and from there on, the rest is working from here as a project manager. I was looking after, and I'm still looking after, the business development side, the strategic side of the things. And yes, so we are getting a lot of traction at the moment. We are expanding into Southeast Asia, Australia. So now I think it's a full house up and running.
Cool. So where did the idea originally come from for FoodChain? You said it was started by your brother and a couple of other co-founders. So what led to that happening?
Okay, so the idea came into my brother's mind at first because he came and visited me here. So that was a bit of a story, because we were here together and we were getting into the Italian side of the food industry over here. So we realized that he actually realized coming over here that there is a lot of there was a lot of misconceptions about the naming in the food industry, like in terms of products, like a lot of fake or Italian sounding Italian products that were sold as Italian, but they were actually made outside of Italy. So it wasn't a really made in Italy product, what we saw on the shelves. So he realized that there was a good opportunity to go back to Italy and do something about this with technology at the time, we were getting into the technological side of the business, looking at Bitcoin. So everything started with Bitcoin and the underpinning technology behind it, which is the blockchain. So we managed to find a way to merge the two things. So the opportunity that was out there in the industry and the technology that was getting available in the market. And we idealized this system that would help people and businesses trace the supply chain of a product from the first step to the final consumer, and provide transparency so that the product that we used to see on the shelves was actually traceable, and we could trace back the provenance to establish whether it was a real made in Italy or not.
So rather than just being a marketing
Yes.
gig and having an emblem that looks like it's Italian.
Yes, correct.
And so when you started looking at that, how big of a problem was it?
Back then, and I'm talking 2013, 2012, the problem was just about to arise. And I noticed that because there were a lot of commercial on TV, and a lot of people in the industry started to talk about transparency. So that was one of the key words: transparency and traceability of food. So eventually, this thing grew and it became a real issue for the industry. So that even, for example, now institutions are getting involved in that, and they are building the legal framework around it to encourage businesses in doing the right thing, in providing traceability and tracking their products, and provide customers the real experience of what happened upstream along the supply chain.
Okay. And so did you end up solving that problem of Italian food as, I guess, the first use case that you went through, or did you find all these other things that might have been bigger as you were going through that you wanted to solve?
Of course, there were many challenges around that.
Yep.
So, providing traceability, like pure traceability and transparency, it's quite impossible because there are many issues along the way than a company will face. But along supply chains, the main thing is probably making all the stakeholders accountable of their actions, so that if everyone is responsible and takes full responsibility for the information that it enters into the supply chain and the information flow along the supply chain, then it takes up a big portion of the issue away. Obviously, other issues like we were using an innovative technology, the blockchain. So there was indeed an innovative thing. So not many people will just go head down into the technology. A lot of businesses and people could not understand why blockchain would be useful for that purpose. But over time, we noticed that eventually, I can say that the whole world is looking at these solutions, a blockchain solution for the food industry. Not only the food industry, but that market was big enough, and it's still big enough, especially in Italy with the Made in Italy that I mentioned before. So yeah, and from there it became easier to promote and become visible, talking about blockchain and food along supply chain.
So one of the things that I want to pick up on there is that I guess the underlying technology is what it is, and anyone in the room that comes from a technology background, you can kind of get your head around it. But when you're dealing with food manufacturers and people in the supply chain, and you said if people put their data in or put their information in, it kind of takes care of itself. You know, are there any stories around trying to get those people to understand what they needed to do and why they needed to do it, and I guess removing the technology component from it? So what were the hurdles that you had along the way?
There is always one of the major challenges, together with the one that I previously mentioned, is that there is a division between what's happening in the digital space and in the physical space. So there is a line. That's what they say: garbage in, garbage out. So if wrong information or a fake information is entered into the chain, then of course the blockchain is a technology that treats it as a data. So it doesn't enforce the truth, but it can help the system in building something that is trustworthy. So in that sense, there is a challenge for the people that enter information. Then that is not technological, but it's more towards their behavior and the responsibility that they have on the supply chain as stakeholders. And on the other side, the digital side of the thing is obviously being taken care of by an amazing technology that can do a lot of things in the right way.
And so, you know, you founded in Italy, solving the problem about Italian food. Italians are quite passionate people, right? And passionate about their food, especially with food. How have you found, I guess, the end point, so the consumer has adopted some of this information that comes out of it so that they know, you know, what are the challenges around that as well? Like, is it front of mind for them when they go, oh, that's a real product, that's not? And how do you represent that?
I'm a consumer before being anything else. So personally, I look at food and what I eat very closely before I buy it. I check it, I make sure that it fits what I'm looking for. So from my point of view, it's something that is a game changer. So it's really important to know where something comes from. Provenance is one of the first things. Of course, if the final product undergoes some processes along the way, then of course the end consumers will be interested in knowing exactly what happened, or at least knowing that they can trust the information that gets put on the label. For example, in Italy, something to be labeled made in Italy requires only one of the processes along the supply chain to be made in Italy. So a jar of tomato sauce or something like that, if it gets labeled made in Italy, it doesn't mean that the entire process of the final product is done in Italy. And usually it's not the most complex and expensive processes that are done in Italy, like growing the tomatoes or processing them, but it's only the bottling. So they put the product in a jar in Italy, and then it gets labeled made in Italy. So that's something that, of course, it's not what the end consumers want to know and actually they want to know that, they don't want to buy if they know it. So it's very important for them to know this kind of thing.
So that's really interesting, because we have that same challenge in Australia, right? You know, food labelling laws, right, are constantly spoken about, because now we've got this thing around how much of the ingredients do come from Australia. So you get some things where they're labelled as Australian and there's 20% in there, right, or 80% or 70%. So, you know, have there been any hurdles along the way of where you're starting to uncover some of these, we won't call them lies in the marketing sense, but, you know, people are working within the boundaries that they normally have to work within, and you're kind of pushing that issue to try and change that. So have you come across any of those issues?
Yes. Many potential customers that we had at the beginning, they were asking, if I'm putting this information out there, will that be public so everyone will see what I put into the information stream, or can I not let everyone know that type of information, or can I just select the information that I want to show to everyone or a restricted group of people? So it is possible. Obviously, there will be an application on top of the technology, so that's something that is definitely possible from a business point of view. But yes, that was one of the first things. And the other thing is that when people get scared that you are kind of opening up their information flow to the market. But on the other side, it can be something that they can leverage on. And they can create a powerful marketing tool if they are doing the right thing. And of course, that was a driver for people to empower the technology and use it in the right way.
So that adoption, right, as you go through, have we got the wiggly one?
Sorry.
No, that's all right. No, because what I want to say, you're dealing with lots of different people in this, right? And for the system to work properly, you've got to get everybody on board. And is there somewhere in that chain that was an early adopter that then brought everybody else on board?
Yes.
Yeah, who was that?
Yeah, that happened quite often.
Yep.
First thing is because the word blockchain is getting traction, so a lot of businesses are getting into that. And the other thing is that when somebody adopts it, then of course they kind of have a positive effect on the other streams that flow into their supply chain, that they flow in or they flow out. So they encourage the either suppliers or the people that they supply to jump on board and use the same system. And as you mentioned, that the optimal scenario is that everyone uses the same system, or at least is in the same digital environment, so the information is easily cross-checked and exchanged without stepping outside of the system. An example is we have conducted our first pilot project with a coffee company, a coffee roasting company. So they were harvesting the coffee somewhere in Africa, on the coast of Africa, and then they were shipping it to Italy where it was getting roasted. And so obviously it was a niche production of coffee. They had all the paperwork in place, very high quality. And there was an ice cream shop, a famous ice cream shop in the region that was producing ice cream, and they were producing coffee ice cream, coffee flavored. So they linked up, and eventually the ice cream business was using the coffee that the coffee guy was supplying to him. So that was an example of people getting on board because there is that information flow that is already building up. So it's easier, and everyone will benefit. It's easier to jump in and have authentic information on hand rather than having something that is coming from who knows where, or at least is not identifiable and cannot be proven by a technology. But then from that point on, it gets registered on the blockchain. So it will not make much sense unless it comes from the very source.
Yeah, okay. And so was that the coffee roaster that started to drive that? And they went back down to say all our suppliers need to put information in the chain. Then they go, we know it's coming from here, and then you ended up with the ice cream, or the gelato.
Yeah, very high quality, very good too.
That's it. And so they jump on board as well. Yes. So are you seeing it is different products around that have a uniqueness about them rather than just everyday things? Because we can buy a tin of Italian tomatoes at Coles and Woolies, but how do we know it's from Italy? And is it just an Italian tomato that somebody's registered a name on? But are you starting to see where a consumer would walk around and go, well, is that tin of tomatoes really Italian? Are you starting to see that behaviour through the chain, or is it more the niche specialty products?
Oh, definitely throughout the chain. And it really depends the supply chain that we're dealing with. In the coffee case, the guy was an entrepreneur. His business was based on a very specific type of coffee. So he was doing it, first of all, to renew the digital system that he had in place, and then for marketing purposes and to deliver something to the consumers with an extra. If we are talking industrial supply chains, then there are many more stakeholders involved, and they might not know each other as well. So the important thing there is to get them connected to information. So the product undergoes different processes, and they might use a technology such as the blockchain to leverage on the quality of the product, or to leverage on the way they are processing the product or the ingredients, or even the boxes or the cans or the tins. So that's something that it can be put onto the register.
Okay. So how do you handle, so if you buy fair trade chocolate, right, or organic fruit and vegetables, or, you know, feed, anything, right, that's organic, there are organisations that go out there and actually make sure that there are certain processes at the farm that are in, you know, are in process. So how do you handle that? So like you said before, right, garbage in, garbage out. Yep. So how do you make sure if somebody's saying we have coffee from this particular area that we can guarantee it, how do you bridge that divide between the technology really and wrap it around the product?
The role of the auditors is not being taken away by the technology, but it actually empowers them to facilitate their work. They obviously look at facts and information before they assess a product or an ingredient, or whether it's fair trade or not. So they have to have authentic information on hand. So this is something that can help if somebody upstream already used this system. And what they do is they still do what they're doing. So they will release their certification, organic or fair trade, based on more trustable data. So that's really what is changing the way of the supply chain industry in food is working, because there is a lot of hype about organic food and all these certifications or provenance. So the people and consumers are very concerned about these things. So the role of the auditors is much more sensitive now. So they are looking, we noticed that they are looking for good solutions. That the first thing that they look into is technology to help their work and to facilitate what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think I've heard, and probably a bunch of people in the room as well have heard food provenance, blockchain is the solution. We're going to fix the issue, you know, Australian food into China, all these kind of things. But I've never really seen anyone to date from a pure startup perspective start to get traction. So why do you think you're different and you are starting to get traction?
We started back in 2011 when this technology was really new still, and it started off with a financial tool, the Bitcoin, and we saw the whole scenario evolving. So we kind of put ourselves ahead of the curve. So we started studying the technology and the features and the strength and the weaknesses, and eventually we became really good in understanding how to apply it, understanding the infrastructure side of the digital infrastructure side of the thing, and how to apply it. So we have something, a competitive advantage on this. The other thing is, once you get a little bit more specific on the type of technology that you are using, many of you probably know that there are different blockchains out there with different characteristics. The main features, the key features that we realized were necessary for this type of industry were not available on the market on a blockchain solution. So we kind of embedded it into our solution, and we can see that this is something that is driving adoption and is driving potential customers to our solution rather than to the competition as well.
Okay. So you mentioned when we spoke before that you've also got a foundation, right, for education and use of those features as well. So do you just want to talk a little bit about that and how that works for people that may not be aware of that?
Yeah. The foundation was born after FoodChain, after the company. It's a non-profit organization based in Switzerland. And the relationship between FoodChain and the foundation is that there were the same people behind when it first started. And the purpose of the foundation was to focus on the technology side. So not doing business, but focusing on the technology side, developing the technology, conduct the research and development to the infrastructure, education, and empowering the community and encouraging the communities into using this new technology, which is the blockchain and especially the blockchain that the foundation is looking after, which is called quadrants. So that's another blockchain that it can be a competitor of some of the existing ones. But as I mentioned before, there are different features that make it more suitable for the use in the industry.
Better stand up. This time last week I was in the Market River area and
Me too.
I saw you there. The little chocolate factory, what he does is he grabs all these beans from all around the world, and what he does is he sources some of the smaller sellers of this stuff. So I said, oh great, it's all fair trade. He goes, oh, sorry, fair trade is not delivering what you might hope that it would. For example, it's not a fair world. And he said some of the smaller growers are outside that auditing process that you talk about, and it only fits for the bigger ones that can fit in with the blockchain, fit in with the auditing process, fit in with the fair trade policies. And so, in fact, what he explains is you can go fair trade and actually be very unfair trade for a whole lot of people in these other countries. And can I have a quick comment on that, perhaps?
Yeah, and this is why institutions are very much getting involved into this, because if it doesn't come from an ethical point of view of the business, it has to come from somewhere else. So, and the institutions or regional authorities are looking into this matter and trying to build the legal framework for these auditors so they can enforce their criteria and their ranges and boundaries for that purpose, for the certification of fair trade or organic. So the role of the government in this case is the government is very much getting involved into this, because obviously they cannot rely on the ethical activities of a business only.
So I'll come back to you, Charlie, if that's okay. Sure. Just making sure. So that's interesting, right? So I think, the initial use case you had was Italian food.
Yeah.
Right? What are some of the other use cases and things that you can share with us that you're starting to get into at the moment as well?
Yeah. So FoodChain, everything started within the food industry, but as the business was growing and the interest was growing from the consumer side and business side, we realized that the very same application could have been used for other supply chains. For example, we have projects going on in the textile industry, it works on the same principles, but we are dealing with cotton, textile, or even clothes rather than food. So that's some use cases we're working on at the moment. Then if we are stepping outside of the supply chain environment, we have implemented our solution into, for example, the traceability of nuclear waste in Italy. And there was a company where is participated by the public administration as well. So they have the problem of tracing the nuclear waste in Italy. They don't know where they go, and they want to certify all these kind of things. It's a very sensitive project, but we won the bid, so now we are working on that as well. And of course, we are FoodChain, but we are working with nuclear waste. It's something that outside of this world, but we are doing that as well. Mentioned public administration, we are working with some councils, and they only want to use the blockchain for the traceability of the information, not for the traceability of products. So they're using it for example, as a land registry. So everything has to be certified and time-stamped with an owner. So everything has to be really in place, and they have chosen blockchain technology to do that. So this is some use cases that we're working at the moment.
So how do you handle that when you're called FoodChain?
It's very challenging because we didn't expect to expand this much and to that extent. We started off with the food, and the choice was made to start with a small segment of the market, or at least it was big enough. It's still billions of fraud in the food industry. And then prove and consolidate our reputation and the technology that we are using within the food industry, and then step outside to the similar things, like textile industry. So we have done that, so we are going down that way, but it's very challenging. And we had a feeling, and that's why we made this decision, that if we went the other way around, was too generic, and going from we do everything to the different vertical of the industry was even more difficult to grasp the customer's attentions, because it's still something that has to be studied and understood before it can be adopted.
I think it's one of the things that comes out in all these fireside chats, with Startup Grind, is you start on a problem for a particular customer or an industry, and you solve that problem rather than go why.
Yeah.
Right, but then obviously you've solved that, and you're looking at that and you're getting traction, but now you've got all these other opportunities coming along.
Yeah.
Right, and you're here with it, hopefully to push up into Asia as well.
Yeah, correct.
So what do you see as the next sort of 12, 18, 24 months of where you're going to go, through Asia, and what some of the challenges are that you're going to have?
Yeah. So from Italy, we got a lot of tractions outside of Italy as well. And we got very close to some collaborators that are collaborating with us at the moment in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, Singapore area in general. And so I see that over the next 12 months, we will penetrate the market in Southeast Asia. And one of the biggest things that is driving our interest and the market there is the palm oil industry, which is a very sensitive industry as well. So they are looking at blockchain as a potential solution. And so we are stepping in that industry, in that geographical area as well. And obviously Australia is there as well, and I'm based here in Perth. So we are looking at Australia as the next market to take on, and especially the Western Australia with the agricultural industry that is driving together with the mining, but I guess we are more advantaged on the food industry. So we can start off from that segment and then expand as well.
And are you looking at food exports into Asia as well, so that you can prove that they turned up, or they were grown in WA, or they were manufactured in WA?
Yes, there are a lot of companies that they want to use this system to protect what they are doing, rather than trying to attack a new side of the market. Like I will see Chinese companies, for example, that they want to use this system to increment the import into their country, because they can prove that it's coming from a source that can be trusted, can be verified, rather than trying to export something, leveraging on the fact that it carries some, the information that it carries have more value. Of course, it can happen both ways, but what we're seeing at the moment is that companies are trying to protect their brand rather than expanding and leverage on the value that the information along their supply chain have. Yeah.
So if I've got a product, say that I'm growing, right, in Western Australia, and I'm selling it currently into, and I'm selling it into China at the moment, what's the sort of project timeline of being able to get that authenticity in the supply chain onto FoodChain?
It can be very complex, or it can be very straightforward. It really depends on, first of all, the complexity of a supply chain we are dealing with, the product, the number of the stakeholders involved, if there are customs involved or government entities, or certifying bodies or authorities. And to get everyone on board, of course, it's a challenge. He has to start somewhere, unless somebody from outside enforces this process on the companies involved. But I'd say if it's something that is produced locally and then it gets exported and is going into a completely different market with different standards and different way of doing things, something that is organic here, I'd say it's definitely organic in China, but not vice versa. So the very challenge is when these standards meet, where is the meeting point? So they meet halfway, or it's certain criteria valid on one side but not on the other, or we are taking on standards on one side, the Australian standards, and we disregard the Chinese standards. So this is something that, again, it comes from the authorities. Okay. So they will, at some point, build some libraries and just make everyone agree on a digital level what is what, and name it properly, and have these digital libraries to enforce then the automation on the chain.
And so do you provide that as a service to help that happen, given that, talking to governments and everything else can be a long and laborious process?
Yep.
But is it something that you do as part of your service as well, or do you just provide, here's the technology, now somebody needs to go and plug everything into it?
We do that, and we are doing it with the Italian government. So in Europe, especially Italy, they are very active on that side. So they are looking at blockchain as a serious solution for the local produce and solve the issues that arise around the fake food and
so that's exporting out, or is that importing
even
as well?
For the local production and sale, so within the Italian territory. So obviously is governed by the Italian laws and it stays there. So it's the Italian government that is taking on these issues. But of course, Italy is part of Europe. The European countries are getting aligned to that, and starting off from, say, Italy. Once they build a standard, then it gets, let's say, translated in a digital way into a smart contract, which is an automation. And once it's in a smart contract, is ready to be used on a digital level, so that it doesn't matter if a transaction is done cross-border, it's still valid for both of the parties. So we provide that as a consultation advisory, or we can do that. We can study the project and provide it as a service together with the infrastructural part of the service.
And so in Italy, was there any particular government departments or agencies that were more receptive to that than others?
Yes.
And I guess that's for people in Australia that are used to dealing with government agencies and departments, they can be quite challenging.
Yes.
Is there any kind of words of advice, based on that learning, that other people could take away from this here?
Yeah. So the Ministry of the Economic Development in Italy is taking on this issue, and they mention blockchain together with the other emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and 5G and all this new technology happening. So they have made an announcement that they are betting on this technology to improve society and business on a commercial level, on a social level. And so they were very reactive, and maybe because there is business involved, and in the business dealing with food, it's probably one of the main industry in Italy if we are looking at fakes and counterfeiting. So the input come from the Ministry of the Economic Development. Yeah. But I can see a lot of other bodies outside of Italy, European states, but even Australia is very active on this kind of things. And blockchain is always there. It's a technology they are really looking at to make the difference.
And this is more of a personal kind of digging into this.
Yes.
Given that the government is always mentioning this, right, as part of the rhetoric that they talk about, is that starting to flow into the skills development as well? For people coming through high school and university and those kind of things as well, that's helping that along the process? Yeah,
there are universities now, they are offering a master in blockchain or things like that. So they started investing, obviously giving grants and and funds to startups. They use certain technologies and things like this, but obviously one step before they will try to educate the people and produce the people with the skills needed then to get into the technology in an efficient way.
Cool. So what's next then for FoodChain / nuclear waste chain / t-shirt chain? Yeah. What do you see as your next kind of 2 years being based out of Perth? Where do you see success coming from?
Definitely growing a lot because we still consider a startup in the sense that we are getting structured because FoodChain was established in 2016. There was some work done before 2016, but we initiated the business in 2016, and now we got out of the Death Valley of the startup, as I mentioned.
Over that.
Yes. So there are projects coming in. There's a lot of workload coming in, a lot of opportunities expanding from the food to the other industries that we kind of didn't expect. And at the same time, we are getting structured with the business. So I see the next at least 12 months or 24 months very, very challenging because we need to keep that growth and we need to keep growing at that pace without losing opportunities on the other side. So before expanding, maybe getting consolidated. So we still have opportunities in Italy and around like Southeast Asia, as I mentioned before. And so the next 12 months is more like about consolidating rather than attacking new markets.
And given that you're here, is
Yes.
there opportunity for people that might have an interest in this to get involved as well, from a Perth perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Like, as I said, I'm based here. This is my home. And although I travel very often to Italy and Southeast Asia, that's where our collaborators are, but I'm always keen to explore any opportunities that arise, especially here where I'm based. So it's not a priority. Perth, Western Australia is not a priority at the moment, so we are not investing our resources primarily in Western Australia, but it's something that it will come along for sure, and given the fact that I'm here, then I'm open to take any opportunity that comes along.
Cool. Fantastic.
Can I ask a question after the show?
Yeah, of course you can. Do you want to, what time have we got here? There we go, 45 minutes, so that's all good. So let's do the official bit. Let's thank Alex for sharing that with us. Great to hear.